before that, I interviews in China with technologists, and they would say, none of the Chinese parents wants their child to go and do a startup to try to be an entrepreneur. They want them to go work for a big company, either a Western company or a state-owned enterprise, and have job security and make good money with good benefits. But I think when Li Keqiang, pushed forward with that initiative, it really began to crack open a system. In some ways, China has had forever, a very large entrepreneurial spirit, which had become, I think, encased in the political structure in a way that sort of sometimes smothered it. So I thought this was just a really interesting and important moment for the young people in the country to.
Yeah, Liz, I can tell you an interesting story in that line, because at that time I was the vice provost for Peking University and the dean of the Yuanpei College. We actually allocated a really big sort of a floor of a particular building to be the innovative center for students.
Oh,
And
wow.
in my Yuanpei College, we were the first one to say it's okay if you leave for a year. No problem. We will support you,
Huh.
and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And I was very happy to see that the students actually, I think zero came out of that from those things. That's not the point. I think
Right.
the point is students at that age, they are daring.
Yeah.
They are actually writing their business proposals with great market analysis and all that competitor analysis. So these people, although they failed at their first project, but give it another 5, 10 years,
Right.
they were exposed to the entrepreneur kind of thinking, and they're not afraid of it. They no longer look at Steve Jobs as a god, and they look at it, oh, actually, if there's a good idea, I'm willing to do it a second time. So I
Right.
think just to supplement your observation with
No, and they don't need to look at Steve Jobs anymore anyway. They've got Jack Ma. They have their own, sort of stars, homegrown entrepreneurs who've really done exceptional things. So I want to switch gears a little bit to an issue that I know you've thought a lot about and have some, concerns about, and that is the sort of over-reliance of the United States and much of the rest of the world on Chinese APIs. Talk to us about the issue here. What is the problem that you see?
Okay, Liz, let's clarify the abbreviation API for the audience, because most of people think in the computer sense.
Okay.
The API we are talking about here is active pharmaceutical ingredients.
Thank you. Yes.
I think you're raising a very serious question. I think, if I may, on a personal level, Liz, it's actually, I feel a profound sadness in discussing this question because to me, medicine, treatment, these are the noblest and across humanity issues, right? And I feel the pain of discussing that in the context of geopolitical tension and risks, but we have to face it. So I think the problem is big, and I hope I'm not exaggerating because I do think it's as serious as weapons of mass destruction. In a sense, because those atomic weapons and all that, they're horrible. But the drugs we're talking about affects 80% of population, whether it's United States or other countries, including China. That's what API, active pharmaceutical ingredients, is about. The daily drugs like ibuprofen, the mundane ones are sleeping pills, or let's say one has needs appendicitis. It is such a small surgery. What about the ketamine, the anesthetics? If you go for a CT scan, what about the contrasting agents? So these are the things we're talking about. And I think there was a figure by FDA that people above 65 years old in the United States, I think it was 85 or 90% of people take at least one drug, at least.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what we are talking about. If there is a breakage in the supply chain, we are talking about 80% of people will be affected. And the question goes beyond the United States. It's Canada, it's Australia. And to be serious, I think if we have such a kind of unfortunate situation, poor countries will suffer even more because the price will go up like crazy. And the United States and Europe are probably okay because we can put up with higher price. But what about African countries? So I think the question is really beyond US-China geopolitical.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I see the problem is globally, I just feel for such critical things, chemicals and APIs, to be so heavily depending on one place,
Right.
that is dangerous. In the United States, we have so many drugs and APIs, let's say 70, 80% is dependent on import. United States used to make all of them right in New Jersey. Then it was shifted to other countries, India being one. And then, interestingly, it started a race to the bottom of economy because
Mm-hmm.
it's not that profitable. So whoever can make it cheaper and equal quality wins. And
Yeah.
given 30 years, Chinese companies are doing extremely well. They're making products for Merck, Pfizer,
Right.
AstraZeneca. But if you trace back, it's all there. Now, geopolitically, it is dangerous, and not only for United States, but for other countries too. So I would think for such kind of things, it might be a better strategy to have more than one place that can produce it. In case it needs, then you can crank up the production. But how to do it, uh, I'm still
And that was going to be my next question. So what's the solution? I mean, what do we do from here then? How do we break this dependency? Because I think
yeah,
there are two different issues right at hand. One is something could happen within China that could be problematic. So maybe there's a factory explosion,
yes, yes,
and that provides some very serious disruption. And I think that is the sort of the global, where it could have global implications. And we've seen both China now and the United States, weaponize their, sort of, when other countries have dependencies on them, weaponize that kind of leverage. You could imagine, as it did with a little bit of the mask diplomacy during COVID, that China could choose to use the APIs, like it did with the rare earths, for example, recently, as a tool of negotiation with the United States or with other countries with which it's having a difficult political relationship. And that really wouldn't probably have as much of an impact in Africa or other countries. But so what do we do about it, I guess, is the
yeah,
question.
yeah. I definitely acknowledge that's something I'm really trying to think hard, but I haven't found a
Okay.
good solution. But I will uh, tell you what I've been trying to explore. One is, of course, what they call the friend shore. If not United States, then India, some of the European countries, or those are the places, or Mexico could be places that we can have friend shore. So just don't put all eggs in one basket. That's the
Right.
strategy. The
Okay. I mean, I
second
think it makes a lot of sense. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, the second one, I'm throwing that idea out to be criticized. I think many people will say that's just not going to work. I think why not invite some of the Chinese companies to have a subsidiaries in the United States? Remember, for example, Wuxia Tech was severely punished by United States government, right? Really, really hard time. The stock, I think, dropped to 92% within 2 days, something like that. And then US government says, okay, we'll give you 8 years because after looking at that carefully, oh boy.
Yeah, we can't live without it,
Yeah,
basically. Yes, yes, oops, big
yeah.
surprise. Yep.
But if you look carefully, Wuxia Tech is establishing factories here in the United States. So is Packaging, so are many other companies. I mean, of course, they have their economic reasons. They have their sort of incentive to spread the risk factors.
Mhm.
But in the United States, I think we probably should encourage them to do so because in case of something that we really, really don't want it to happen, those factories are actually in Texas, in Boston, and that will be a source of those drugs. Um, and I would say that's at least something we should think about rather than rejecting that outright as another kind of economic invasion. So I'm thinking maybe we should think about this a little bit more, although I'm quite uncertain myself.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really big question that I don't think the U.S. government has yet, I mean, has yet to address basically, and we
Yeah,
certainly have seen it in battery technology with CATL, and do we want Chinese companies that are ahead basically of U.S. companies or have abilities that U.S. companies don't currently have to come here and to manufacture, to provide jobs, all good. But does that then stunt the ability of homegrown U.S. industry to develop? And of course, China's experience, we could say, can we learn from the Chinese experience in the 1980s through the
yeah,
1990s of welcoming that kind of foreign investment, but then requiring certain things from those foreign investors in
yes,
terms of R&D, investment or tech transfer or, whatever, manufacturing a certain amount in order to have access to the market. They put in many, many different kinds of stipulations for access to the Chinese market. And I'm not sure whether Chinese companies will be prepared to respond in the same way that many American and other multinationals did when China was just opening up, right? So I think there are some complicated questions, I think, around whether or not the United States and other countries, right, feel as though they need to have their own indigenous, to take a word that's
yeah.
often applied to China, indigenous innovation, indigenous industries, or whether we don't need to have that in every sector, and we should just, in fact, welcome the Chinese companies who are going to be providing us with both the technology that we need and jobs.
Yeah.
So,
One thing, Liz, I want to give an example to you. I mean, just look at Tesla, right? Elon
mhm,
Musk in Shanghai. Chinese government and local government really, really opened their arms to Elon Musk. And basically, whatever you ask, we'll get it done next week,
right,
something like that.
right,
And their long-term thinking is just having you here. You train the workers, the engineers, and the way you do things. We learn from it.
right.
People can be transferred to the next Xiaomi
Yes.
or
No, I think that's
BYD, right?
exactly right. That's exactly right. And if you read Apple in China, the book that came out not that long ago, that's exactly what happened with Foxconn and Apple.
Yeah.
Foxconn based in China, though,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And all of their engineers and all the training that Apple did then went out to seed many, many other parts of sort of the iPhone ecosystem, for example, throughout China. So it's a really fascinating story that does, I think, exactly what you're saying, and maybe a really important point to make in the context of what the U.S. could gain from this process. So I'm really glad that you raised that. I
Yeah.
think it's a
And Liz, I do have a suggestion. Again, quite a premature one. I think we can select areas
Mhm.
and factories or companies that we really want to learn from. For example, if there's a company who does pretty ordinary things and just compete with US companies, we probably don't quite welcome that.
Don't need.
However, if it's battery technology, which is dominant, we may want to learn from them.
Right.
Another one I want to raise in awareness is China is no longer the one 30 years ago that basically people here always think that Chinese stole things from United States. True or not, today, I think there are some fields Chinese already leading.
Absolutely.
And for United States, I think we should be confident enough to learn from the best, whoever they are. It could be a Japanese company, it could be Chinese, I don't care, a Somalian company. If they do something the best, I will learn from that.
Right.
I think we should have this open-mindedness and confidence to accommodate and true modesty to recognize there are fields we need to learn from other people too.
Yes, I happen to agree with you on that point. I think, and the number of those fields will probably increase over time. So,
Yeah.
we better figure out our path forward, or we may relegate ourselves to, eventually to some sort of second tier innovation nation. So let's turn now for a couple of last questions, to the cooperation between the United States and China, and we've sort of started to move in that direction. The challenge, and you kind of epitomize, you yourself in one person are a collaboration, basically, between the United States and China. But it has become, I think, increasingly difficult for American and Chinese researchers to collaborate in a number of areas that are considered to be somehow sensitive technologies. And that, I think, number of technologies has also increased over time. I remember when I was in the administration, and we had the small yard and the high fence, and the yard, as people kept pointing out quite accurately, the yard seemed to be getting bigger and bigger with more and more technologies, and nobody could quite determine. Every agency had its own list of what constituted critical technologies, and so. But how do you see, are there areas that where you would say, actually, U.S. scientists, for the sake of their own, development of their own industries, their own sort of fields here, should not be collaborating with Chinese institutions, or for reasons of national or economic security? So are there areas where you'd say, I don't think that's a good idea? Or do you think sort of everything should be open for some form of cooperation?
I think I will go for the first one, which is collaborate in as many fields as national security allows. That's a difficult proposition. I'll come back to the caveat later. So let me explain. I think that's where I want to wear my global citizen hat.
Okay.
As a physician scientist, my career is devoted to treating patients, and they are Chinese, they're Americans, they are Venezuelans. I went there for looking at Huntington's disease patients. So in these areas, they really do have a global impact, a global participation. And I think United States leadership is not shying away from that, but actually be in it and be still a leader in that. In treating Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease, I would not put a restriction in that cancer biology. I will say support them. If, let's say, China comes up with a next Nobel laureate for inventing a drug treating cancer, I will be very happy with it because it does not impact United States national security in that sense. It benefits everybody. So those are the groups I think just strongly I support collaboration. Now the next group, Another extreme, of course, is purely, clearly national security sensitive. For example, materials making bombs or all those military ones. I would say it's natural. Nobody will allow other countries, people getting into it, right? Now, the middle one, that's interesting. How do we look at that? And here, the caveat I want to mention is the line between basic research, civilian use technology, and dual use technology
Yeah.
has been blurred more and more and more. For example, let's say math. That used to be the highest intellectual, sort of the most pure kind of
Yeah.
science. Now we know algorithm is in every AI product, in every missile guided, laser guided missile in Starlink. So the applied math thing, do you call it pure science or dual usage? I mean, how do you draw the line? I think that is the part I am hesitating and I don't have a great idea how to define that. Now, I have a second best solution to that. It's a practical second best, what I call it a poor man's Cadillac approach. It is anything that is publicly published is probably okay. Publication, I refer to both academic journals as well as patents.
Yeah.
Because in both scientific journals and patent applications, we are required to detail our methodology so that, quote unquote, people with reasonable knowledge can reproduce it. This is a requirement. When I publish my paper on the top journal or even middle journal, this is what I have to do because I have to subject myself to peer scientists' criticism, and they should repeat my results. If they cannot, I am in trouble, right? So in patent too, in patent application, this is a requirement. Now, for all these things, I will think, God, it's already there. I mean, it doesn't make sense you are keeping a secret. It's already there. Then I will not put too much of a restriction. There are, of course, government supported or military use. Those are the ones I will probably cut a very clean one. But as long as publicly available, I will not put too much of a restriction on that.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
mean, I
fine.
think those are very wise words. There are probably still some technologies, even semiconductor technology, as we've seen, what one person considers to be something that should be export controlled, another person thinks, no, that's no problem. And so I think, there still, it can be very difficult, I think, to draw that line as you suggest. But I do think the sort of publication, using that as a metric for determining whether or not something, should be able, to be cooperated on and, by both sides is at least begins to, I think, address that sort of messy middle area that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. It can be the first line of triage.
Yeah.
Then we go to the second, like be more detailed, right? But first line, I would probably use that one as the first approach.
So I want you to put for our last, question or so, I want you to put your policy advice hat back on again. And you've been so
Hmm.
good about offering, I think, constructive solutions to some of the thorny problems that we've been discussing. But, one of the issues, you started off by talking about the differences in the system and the state, sort of driven top-down model in China as opposed to the grassroots bottom-up model of the United States. And I think for many people here in the United States, they've come to the conclusion or are arriving at the conclusion that the United States can't simply compete this way anymore. that massive state investment in China across so many areas that we saw, for example, in the Made in China 2025 technologies, those sort of 10 areas of critical cutting edge technologies where, both, as you say, the center and the local governments just, poured money into these areas to the point that, you had hundreds of companies around single products competing, and many could not survive. Nonetheless, right, they've produced, some terrific electric vehicles, for example. But how can the US compete in this environment? Because I would suggest that it seems like something is missing in the US ecosystem today that would enable it to compete against this massively sort of subsidized Chinese machine.
Yeah, great question. I do have several very specific recommendations.
Great.
The first one is basic science funding.
Mm.
United States, especially after Second World War, had a booming science technology for decades and decades. That's because we actually have been putting a huge sort of funding resource to basic research. Those are the ones seemingly we don't know, we're not quite sure when it was studied, but then it turned out to be unbelievably powerful, right? So I think the basic science is important. And I think we win by having this deep roots of greatest science in math, physics, chemistry, biology, and engineering, computer science. At the beginning, I think science goes in a way that is different from technology is. Technologies usually have a pretty clear-minded endpoint in sight. Like, I want to design a robot that can do the cooking Kung Pao chicken. Okay. But science is when people studied, let's say, a jellyfish glowing protein called the green fluorescent protein. Nobody knows how this is going to be big. And eventually it turned out to be a Nobel winning thing. So I think the basic science is important. That's the source, the fountain of youth of all the other things. So that is one. And I think in that, as a scientist and physician, I would plea the administrations do not cut NIH funding, NSF funding, because these are our really true fountain of youth, fountain of innovation.
Yeah.
The second one is we should continue our support for translational work. And here I want to remind all of us, United States government has been doing unbelievably big, humongous government programs. We should not forget that, remember the Manhattan Project?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was $2 billion at that time. It was completely government support, right? The initiation of internet was government supported. The moonshot was initiated by Kennedy. All these are, God knows, billions in dollars of projects that actually raised our cohesiveness and challenge to the whole society, whole science and technology. And I would say those are the ones we should remember. United States government was not shying away from these challenges. I remember Kennedy's speech, like we do it not because it's easy, but because it's hard, right? It was the famous
Right.
quote. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So I think we should continue that, and we need to identify the key areas. Obviously, we cannot do anything in everything, but there are key areas, and I think we should not shy away from that. And the third one is again another plea to the whole society, not only the government, which is United States is great because it really invites the global talents,
Mm.
right? For example, Chinese students here, 86% of the PhDs earned in United States state.
Yeah, they used to say,
86%.
not anymore, not anymore, but yes.
So those are the people who made their contributions, and they identify with the ideology even.
Yeah.
Now, it's the talents that make things work. So I would say US has been a magnet of attracting globally. If you're good, come over here and you have a chance. So I think that is so critical. I'm not saying homegrown Americans are not good at it. That's not the argument. I've taught at the best institutions, and I know how a homegrown kid is just great. But absorbing the global talents is something that make us great. Just look around, right? You and I, we're sitting on the same committee with Fei Li, the AI, like a really founding people. And where is she come from?
Right. Direct
And
from
Elon
China.
Musk, Sergey Brin, just again and again. I think it is important to welcome people around the world, not pushing them away. And I do want to add a specific comment on the concern that some of the Chinese students here actually returned.
Mhm.
Some people say, hey, these are the people who brought our technology, our knowledge back to China and help China grow. Yes, I don't deny that. China's science technology growth has a huge factor from that. And I don't deny there are a few malicious cases, stealing intellectual property, probably. But I will say by and large, it's a positive influence. And I want to remind people of one thing. The science development in China, it is a lot more than just allowing Chinese to make more products, to be innovative in making a device. It's actually a way of thinking that China's growth is really, really in need of that because the sense of science is it's about seeking truth relentlessly. You think about something and you believe the world is not what I think it is, it's actually what it is objectively. So you go for evidence, you do experiments, get data. When you have that, you always look at that with cautiousness, saying, I think I can have a theory explaining that, but I could be wrong. I'm open to criticisms, I'm open to counter arguments, and open to, I'm very at ease in criticizing my co-workers' theory as well as the other way. So that is really important for any society, for China to be an open society, to build the national consensus. So that is, don't forget that aspect. This is what people coming, the returnees from United States, they have been trying to bring that aspect into China. And I think it is important to recognize that. Not only, now they're able to make XYZ product. So I think let's be a little bit sort of more open-minded as a global citizen. I would say let's remember that too.
Yeah. So wonderful, wonderful words to end on from your mouth to, I hope,